This is Becky Schultz with Equipment Today and ForConstructionPros.com, and I'm here with Brian Turmail, Vice President, Public Affairs and Strategic Initiatives for the AGC of America. Brian, I'd like to talk a little bit about the infrastructure concerns that are going on right now, and the degree to which the U.S. is currently underinvesting in its infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit about that and the impact that that has on the U.S. economy?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, even before coronavirus, we were struggling with sort of chronic investment in our aging infrastructure. You have to remember that we have a highway system that was built in the 1950s and 1960s, largely designed to last about 50 years. Well, it's been about 70 years, 80 years since a lot of that infrastructure was built. And it was designed to handle traffic projections that in the sort of traffic engineers, most optimistic or wildest expectations were far below the traffic levels we see today. And then the other challenge is that our highway system was designed largely as an east-west function. Remember, it was sold in part as a defense measure. And the idea was that it would make it easier to rush an army from one coast to another to fend off an invasion. But in the world post-NAFTA, we have an enormous amount of traffic that goes north-south in the United States, in addition to just, people who want to go south for the winter or head north for the summer, right? So
Sure.
we have a highway system that's aging. We have a highway system that's overburdened. And we have a highway system that isn't well designed to handle the current flows of people and commerce. Combined with that, we haven't adjusted how much we collect into the Federal Highway Trust Fund, which is one of the primary vehicles for investing in our highways, since 1993. That was the last time they raised the federal gas tax. So our needs are growing, but we continue to want to kid ourselves that we can meet those growing needs with the same amount of money that we were collecting in 1993. And so that's kind of a perfect recipe for allowing our roads and bridges to deteriorate. As any number of reports that have come out between the every other year report card on America's infrastructure to TRIP, which is a well-respected road research network, puts out the most recent report on the condition of the nation's rural roads and their impact on safety and cost of maintaining a vehicle. It just all show that even pre-coronavirus, we had a real infrastructure problem. And then the coronavirus hit, right? And, I'm talking to you from my house. Either you're from the Yellow Cloud submarine or you're from, but neither of us are driving to work. And so too are many other millions of Americans. I haven't bought a tank of gas since March 14th. And many other Americans haven't bought gas since about that time either. And the way that not only our Federal Highway Trust Fund collects revenue, but most state highway trust funds, at least in part, are dependent on gas tax for revenue. And if no one's buying gas, then there's no gas tax revenue coming in. So we have this horrible irony, right? That we've got no one on our roads. It's like the perfect time to get in and fix every broken bridge and road out there, right?
Absolutely.
We're not from work. We're not going to delay shipments because no one's on the roads. Yet many state DOTs, and we've seen this in Ohio, we've seen this in North Carolina, have already announced cutbacks to their road repair program, their road construction program, because the money's not coming in. And Washington, as usual, has done a lot of talking about infrastructure and actually done nothing to fund infrastructure or even support that $50 billion hole in state highway DOT funds that the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials has identified.
Absolutely. So specifically looking at the movement of people and materials, how is this lack of infrastructure funding impacting the ability to get materials for construction sites, whether it's moving materials for warehouses or for medical supplies? How is that all playing into kind of disrupting the flow of supplies across the country?
Well, one of the great innovations of the American economy over the last 30, 40 years, and you've heard a lot about this, is that we've essentially created a just-in-time model for business. So that if I'm the Gap, right, the shirts that I expect to sell on Tuesday arrive at my store on Monday evening. If I'm Harley Davidson and my assembly factory in, I think it's in Wauwatosa, is expecting the engines to arrive from my plant in Kansas City minutes before I need to drop them into the chassis of the bike, right? And that means that our economy is far more efficient. We don't have to spend money on warehousing items. We don't stockpile items like a cold, sort of dark warehouse until they're needed. We're hyper efficient. But that just-in-time model for our economy really works well when our transportation network is in good shape. It doesn't work well if those engines are stuck because they got to be rerouted around a bridge that's been posted for lighter traffic somewhere between the city and suburban Milwaukee. And it doesn't work if the fresh fruit that's on its way to my neighborhood Safeway is stuck in traffic somewhere in Berlin, Maryland, right? Because someone hit a pothole and careened out of their lane and hit someone else. So our infrastructure, which kind of allowed us to become a hyper-efficient economy, as it deteriorates, is undermining the very innovations that it once encouraged. And that slows down our ability to be as competitive, and that certainly raises prices for materials. In the construction industry, we see that if you think about most construction projects, there's no warehouse, right? Your warehouse is the 10 feet between the construction fence and the front of the building. So construction is particularly sensitive to on-time delivery, because if you've got a bunch of glazers scheduled to show up on Thursday to install all your windows, but your windows are stuck in Kenosha when they're supposed to be in Sheboygan, then that's going to be a problem.
Right.
A bunch of glazers to stand around and do nothing but drink coffee, hopefully at a socially distanced and masked, but nonetheless, that's why both because we've got members who build roads and bridges, but also because all of our members depend on the infrastructure. Our association is long advocated and is ramped up its advocacy for investing more in our roads and bridges and other forms of public infrastructure.
What do you think the chances are that we're actually going to see some of that? I know there's been some things that have been floated around, at least in the near term, as a part of the next phase of stimulus for the economy in relationship to the COVID-19 crisis. Do you see that being a possibility that we might see some type of infrastructure investment as part of that package?
I mean, I think there have been a lot of reports that Republicans, particularly in the Senate, are hesitant to write another large check until they see what kind of recovery we're going to have when more states end their lockdowns, right? When these economic lockdowns come to an end, are we going to see that sort of V-shaped recovery, or is it going to be more like the Nike swoosh where it's a quick drop and then a very slow rise? If it's a quick drop and a very slow rise, there's a good chance that even Republicans in the Senate will realize we need to do more, and certainly investing in infrastructure is something that's a lot easier for Republicans and Democrats to agree on than on some form of the Green New Deal or other measures like that. So there's a chance, but to some extent we feel a little bit like Charlie Brown with the football that Lucy always holds out, and pulls away at the last minute. Politicians are always talking about infrastructure, and they're not going to, and we end up not seeing it in that sort of big package. But, let's say worst case scenario, we don't get a huge infrastructure package as part of coronavirus relief measure 4.0, or I think that's the next one. Even if we don't get a big bill with a capital B, we're likely to get decent sized bills, the lowercase b, in that Congress still has to authorize a new surface transportation bill. They still have to authorize a new Water Resources Development Act. They still have to authorize the Federal Aviation Administration capital accounts. So even if there's not a huge headline-making sort of large figure infrastructure bill that comes out as part of a single package, we have every reason to expect that Congress will find ways to plus up the amount of money that they're putting into infrastructure with all these smaller bills. Because as much as Republicans, I think, are wary of getting tagged with spending even more in the trillions, they also appreciate the economic benefits of infrastructure, and they may just find ways to do it a little bit more on the down low than with a single sort of blockbuster bill. So, we're not letting our guard up. We're certainly doing everything we can to educate Congress. But if I had to bet, I'd say we're more likely to get good, decent-sized bills than we are to get a single large infrastructure bill out of the recovery effort.
But looking longer term, I know that one of the things that President Trump and even the Democrats have agreed to is the need for essentially a $2 trillion infrastructure package. Realistically, it seems unlikely to happen anytime within 2020. Who knows what's going to happen beyond that? But from your perspective, is that even enough to address the shortfalls that we've had in infrastructure investment? And do you see that as a likely outcome anytime in the near future? I mean, obviously, the reauthorization of the FAST Act is due to come up in September. Is it likely that we might see some forms of what's in that $2 trillion proposal materializing?
Yeah, I think we'll see some improvements out of the reauthorization process in September. But as for a single large bill, I don't think we'll see anything until after the election. We're at a point where Democrats smell a little blood in the water for the president and the chance of taking the Senate. They don't want to give Republicans or the president a big infrastructure victory, or how much the president really wants to work with Democrats in the House either. The relationship there is at least outwardly rather toxic right now. Regardless of how the election works out, we'll be in a period where you've got a new Congress and either the returning president or a new president. It might be an opportunity to find some early in 2021. And again, I think also a lot of it depends on, if the economy is booming, it might be easier to not do infrastructure. But if the economy is struggling a little bit, there'll be a real desire in Washington to make sure that they are doing something that's stimulative without calling it a stimulus. And again, a great way to do that is through infrastructure. And
going back to my earlier question, do you think that if we were to say, looking at pie in the sky, that $2 trillion was going to be handed over, is that even enough to cover what's needed out there to get the economy humming and also to address the ongoing needs out there? Do you feel that that's the right figure to be throwing out?
It's hard to quibble with $2 trillion. Would we like more? Sure. I mean, we're advocates for the construction industry. We don't see a maximum figure that could be spent on construction. At the same time, I think it would be hard to be credible and not say that $2 trillion wouldn't help quite a bit. Would it fix every single problem? Probably not. Would it make our infrastructure a lot better than it is today? Without a doubt. The devil, of course, is in the details. How's that $2 trillion being spent? What kind of requirements are added onto those $2 trillion that would undermine the buying power of that? Are there a lot of new sort of green mandates that come with that $2 trillion that might make a mile of highway construction that much more expensive than it is today? It's always possible. But, if someone wanted to write a larger check, we would not say no, but we're not going to complain about $2 trillion.
Yeah, I understand that for sure. So what do you think that if we are to see a substantial infrastructure package, what are the potential biggest economic benefits? And in particular, when you're looking at it from not just the construction perspective, but from the ability to get the transportation and manufacturing sectors moving forward again?
Well, clearly the economic benefits of investing in infrastructure right now are much better than they were even a year ago, in the sense that construction firms have the ability to easily and quickly ramp up staffing, right? If we put $2 trillion in infrastructure last year, contractors would have found a way to make it work. It would have struggled to add much more to their size of their, because we were in the tightest labor market anyone had ever seen. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, mostly unfortunately, we've now got 30 plus million people in the labor force. So the economic benefits of making that $2 trillion infrastructure investment now would be enormous, because construction firms would be able to bring in a lot of people out of the unemployment rolls and put them to work in high-paying construction careers. So that would be, an immediate benefit. Beyond the sort of the broader multiplier impact of construction firms buying more equipment, more materials, more supplies, more vests, more helmets, all that, most of which is made in the United States. The broader impact is obviously in making our economy more efficient, right? And who knows what the longer term trends are going to be in terms of how business operates post-coronavirus. But one thing that's likely is that we're going to see a lot more regional concentration of manufacturing. I think, the coronavirus has been a real eye opener for folks that, it's a little bit naive to rely on everything you need as essential for this country to come from overseas. It's a country that may not have our interests in mind. So you're going to see, we think, an acceleration of the sort of insourcing of more manufacturing capacity in the United States, which means that we got to have our surface transportation network improve so that we can better move goods from the southeast to the southwest, as opposed to worrying about how to just move goods from the Port of LA Long Beach to the Mall of America.
Kind of looking at the major roadblocks to getting a larger infrastructure package moving forward, what do you see as some of the biggest impediments there, and how are organizations such as the AGC trying to work with other industry associations, other stakeholders, to try to encourage Congress to really view infrastructure funding as the potential solution going forward to help get the economy back on a solid footing again?
The biggest single obstacle is, how do you pay for it, right? I mean, everyone will tell you, and I believe them, that they support new infrastructure, but a lot of people are afraid of being labeled as the person who makes your gas more expensive, which is ironic because they're essentially giving gas away right now, by the way, at least around here. And whether raising the gas tax, which we've long advocated, is the right mechanism, or whether we need to take this moment to transition to a vehicle miles traveled mechanism for collecting revenue. I think that we need to figure that out. But from a policy point of view, this isn't hard, right? It's a user-pays program, and we simply need to have an honest conversation with people who use our highway system and say, hey, it's going to cost a little bit more for you to have safe bridges and a reliable commute. Now, that's a conversation that my grocery store is able to pull off easily. Hey, you might have to pay a little bit more to make sure your ground beef isn't fetid or that your milk isn't spoiled. I'm okay with that because I want to give my children, safe milk and healthy meat. We should be willing to have the same honest conversation with people who use our transportation network that we were once able to do in the 1950s and 1960s, but somehow are afraid to do today. Like a lot of things in Washington that are problems, the policy part isn't confusing. We know what we need to do. We know how to do it. We know how to pay for it. We just lack the political will to be honest with Americans and sell it. It's a bit mystifying because many states' legislatures have had those honest conversations with their residents. And in fact, that when you look at their election returns, there's constituents like the honesty. They don't vote people out of office for raising their gas tax. They thank them and keep them in office for fixing their bridges and making their commutes more reliable. We should have the same honesty and the same courage in Washington that we've got in Madison and in Springfield and in Juneau.
Is there anything that you can encourage people that are viewing this to do to help to propel that momentum a little bit further forward?
Sure. Well, if they visit our advocacy page, advocacy.agc.org, we've got plenty of information about how people can contact their member of Congress. Immediate need, of course, is to get that $50 billion into state DOTs so that they can keep their current road programs running. And then second, weigh in with members of Congress about the need for a large infrastructure package. You can find all that information right again at advocacy.agc.org. We're also partnering with some of the other large associations in the construction industry through our Transportation Construction Coalition. And if you go to the transportationconstructioncoalition.org website, it's a mouthful, but transportationconstructioncoalition.org, there's also plenty of information about how you can educate members of Congress, especially if, for whatever reason, you don't belong to AGC of America and don't want to go through an AGC of America vehicle. There's another way to do that that's a bit more agnostic. At the same time, most people who run or are involved in construction have a good working relationship with their local members of Congress. Tell them what you need. Make sure they know where you stand, and that as a large employer in your local area, that you're counting on them to do the right thing when it comes to funding infrastructure. Members of Congress have one job, which is to make sure that they're keeping their constituents happy so they can get reelected. Make sure they know that part of keeping you happy and getting reelected is passing an infrastructure bill.
Yeah, so really it's just communicating is what you're saying, making sure you keep
Absolutely.
communicating.
We see this time and again, squeaky wheel gets the oil, and we need to be the squeaky wheel.
Absolutely. So I think that you've given us some really good insights into what's happening out there, what we might be able to expect or not expect coming out of infrastructure investment. Is there anything else that you'd like to share at this point in relationship to this topic, or in terms of what the AGC is doing to help move things forward?
No, I think that the one thing that we need to realize is that especially if we can get some infrastructure investments in there, we have an almost historic opportunity within the construction industry to bring in a whole new generation of highly qualified workers. This is an awful situation we're in as a country, but it's a tremendous opportunity to really recruit a whole new group of people into the construction industry, because unlike previous downturns, especially if we get some infrastructure investment, we'll be hiring far sooner than the rest of the industry. We've got first dibs on 36 million people, most of whom are incredibly highly qualified. So it's another reason why, in addition to fixing our economy and fixing our roads, getting some infrastructure funding now is really a great way to bring a lot of new people onto teams and reinvigorate that interest in what is a pretty amazing industry.
I agree. Well, thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate your time today. And I think that this has really been very insightful for me, and I'm sure for everyone else.
Happy to help anytime.